Now that we have our still lifes mapped out in pencil, it's time to go in with paint. If anybody remembers the rules I said early on with some other projects, with painting, you want to work from back to front, from light to dark, from large to small, and in layers. So I will be demonstrating all of these things in my example here. The first thing I want to say as well is since we are limited with our color palettes, please try your hardest to make your own colors. Even if it's just mixing your blues with the greens to get a variation, it's going to make your painting more interesting and a little bit more mature. When we use paint right out of the palette, it tends to look a little bit juvenile and primitive. So after having mixed a couple of my colors onto the lid of my paint palette, I'm going to go in and start to fill in my background. Ideally, the background color will be a very light wash, meaning there is very little pigment in the color. It's simply meant to take away from all of the white of the page. My background in my photo was white, but I think I mentioned to this class I like to play around with colors, so that's why I'm choosing this blue-green for my background. You are welcome to make up your own colors as well, or you can make it just a light gray. My recommendation to you is that if you have black in your palette, you do not use the black. In fact, we shouldn't be using straight black at all in these paintings. Black watercolor is just way too powerful and it tends to take over when we use it. If you're going to use any sort of gray or try to get a dark black, you should make it yourself. Again, if you're not sure how, black is made by mixing complementary colors. If you're going to darken part of your painting with a homemade black, try to use a complement that includes a color that you're darkening. For example, since I'm making a blue-green, if I wanted to make the darkest version of blue-green possible, I would make my complements out of blue and orange because it will still have that blue tint to it and will make it seem like it's part of the same thing. As I continue to paint my items, I realize this dark halo that I'm adding to the background is probably darker than I should have started with. If you recall, when I had just put my first layer of blue-green, it was much lighter, and I recommend you guys do that to start. Similarly, with the bottom portion of my background, I try to keep my colors within theme, and I do a light purple. But as I start to paint, again, I realized my background was probably too dark. Be safe and do it lighter than I'm doing. Remember, back to front, light to dark, large to small. Now that I have my background filled in, I'm just going in and adding an equally as light wash to block in the shapes of my objects. Remember, we need to plan ahead with highlights. So if anything on your object is a solid white, you should plan ahead and leave it white. You don't want to mark it because you will be unable to pick that paint off the paper once it's down. When looking at my still life photo, I noticed that my tissue box and the little wonky bowl in front of it are both shades of brown. So to differentiate, I mixed brown with some magenta to get a more red-brown for the tissue box, and I mixed my brown with yellow to get a more yellow-brown for the bowl. Just as a consistent reminder, look at how light my painting is my first time around. This would technically be considered my underpainting. It's really when I go in and layer and develop those darker shades that my painting starts to become what it should be. And if you accidentally put down some paint that is a little too dark to start, quickly grab a clean section of your paper towel and dab it up before it has a chance to become permanent. But this gray that I'm filling in on my tissue, like I said, I made that gray. Can't remember what I did at the time, but I probably did a mixture of reddish brown. So the complement to red is green. So by mixing those, I get that natural looking gray. Here I'm starting to go in and layer some darker red browns over my tissue box to get some darker values that I see in my photo. Take note that I wait until the bottom layer dries before I start to layer. If I don't wait for it to dry, the new paint will simply pool with the old paint and you won't get that layered effect, and the paint won't get much darker. So when I say large to small, that's exactly what I've been doing. I started by filling in my objects entirely, and now I'm going in and finalizing some smaller details within those items. I'm also working on my tissue box first because that is what is in the background. By doing the background first, I eliminate the need of having to be more careful around the items in the foreground. If I had done my foreground items first, I'd basically have to tiptoe around those items with my paintbrush to ensure that I don't mess them up. But this way, since my little mug is much darker than that light part of the tissue box, it's okay if I go a little bit onto the tissue box. This minor overlapping will also get rid of any tiny white lines that are left in between items. So the next portion of this video, I spend a very good amount of time painting layers onto my mug. I go over it with my paint, I let it dry, and I keep going over it until it gets the darkness that I want. So I do this quite a bit because I want this mug to get pretty dark. And here I'm trying to plan ahead a little bit because there is a little white line from the tea bag that goes down the side of my mug. So I know if I go over that too dark right now, I won't be able to lighten it back up. You also might be able to start to see the dilemma where I realized that my purple background was a little too dark. Right now, there is not much value difference between the purple of my mug and the purple of my background. So I really need to darken up that mug so that it stands out against the background. If anyone is wondering, this is about an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of painting that I've condensed down to 17 minutes just for the sake of demoing to you. So if you're getting frustrated that this isn't coming out the way you want, please just continue to layer and take your time. You will slowly start to see it come together the more work you put into it. Anything you make that is going to look nice is going to take time, especially for those of us who might be painting for the first time or haven't painted in a while. Any form of art you might choose to do, you cannot expect it to be done fast and done well unless you've had years and years to practice. It's easier to start out taking your time and watch it come together well than try to rush and fix mistakes. It's only once I'm near the end that I start to focus on small details. Remember, large to small. It's also near the end that I start to darken my darkest areas of the painting. I can even exaggerate some of the dark areas for more exaggerated and dramatic contrast. I also typically like to throw in multiple colors just for some variation. I didn't do that so much with this painting, so I'm trying a little bit last minute to do that now. Also, when I finally get to my cast shadows on the table, remember, just like how you should use the complementary colors that are part of your item, I'm going to use the complements to purple to help make the shadows on the surface look more natural. So purple and yellow will give me a nice dark shade to represent the cast shadows that I get from my mug and from my angel.